The Diolkos of Corinth, the most famous railway of ancient Greece. In the modern era, the road has been pivotal to historical discussions about Corinth's exceptional maritime character and wealth. In the popular view found in tourist guides, websites, and Bible commentaries, the road was used throughout antiquity for portaging massive military and commercial ships and their cargoes across an isthmus over 6 kilometers wide. Traders arriving from Italy or Asia Minor arrived at the western and eastern ends and had their ships and freights transported overland to the opposite gulf, where they continued on to distant destinations. Merchants benefited from a major shortcut in long-distance trade, while Corinth received revenues on the tolls, transport fees, and services to passengers in transit. The Diolkos in turn made the isthmus a great zone of transshipment, and turned Corinth into a populous city of visitors and transients who clamored for all the goods and vices the city had to offer. In the end, everybody won. The wealthy Corinthians, the merchants, the sailors, even the prostitutes. But that's the traditional view. Does the historical and archaeological evidence support this? Was the Diolkos really the greatest railway of classical antiquity? Did it actually facilitate long-distance trade, such that ancient Corinth became a wealthy city in the process? Let's take a look. We'll start with the idea of the Diolkos itself. Diolkos comes from the Greek word dielko, a compound verb that means to draw something across. Modern scholars borrowed that term from the geographer Strabo, who, during the reign of the Emperor Augustus, named the Diolkos the narrowest part of the isthmus. It was a district where the Temple of Poseidon was located, Strabo said, and where ships were dragged from sea to sea. In Strabo's view, the Diolkos was a toponym for the narrowest part of the great land bridge connecting central and southern Greece, and that place name had something to do with drawing something across. Now, it was scholars in the 19th century who read Strabo and concluded the Diolkos was a physical feature in the landscape, like a railroad or a slipway, used to transport ships, both military and commercial, from one side of the isthmus to another. But notice that Strabo never uses the word road, never describes the isthmus as a major shipping lane. In fact, neither Strabo nor any other ancient writer imagined a monumental portage road that made the isthmus a major railway or trade route. You may be asking why Strabo uses that term at all. How did the isthmus become associated with the word Diolkos in the first place, and its connotations of dragging something across? The answer to that question can be found in the writings of ancient historians, such as Thucydides, Polybius, and Livy, who wrote of instances of admirals or generals dragging their military fleets over the isthmus. A generation ago, scholars read these references as evidence that the Corinthians ported ships pretty much all the time. The argument went something like follows. If ancient history records instances of the Corinthians moving military vessels overland during times of war, commercial ships must also have moved overland in times of peace. Ancient historians, after all, who were interested in military matters, were more likely to name military portages than ordinary commercial transfers. But more recent scholarship has cast doubt on this argument for 3 reasons. First, the historians who describe specific instances of portaging characterize them as truly extraordinary naval actions. They describe them as stealth military stratagems designed by brilliant commanders to catch the enemy off guard or quickly move a fleet outside of harm's way. They are expensive and time-consuming processes in ancient histories, not ordinary ones. Second, as scholars have learned more about ancient maritime craft, it seems less and less likely that warships or commercial craft weighing 10 to 20 tons could quickly and easily have been dragged out of water over dry ground for 6 kilometers. There's nothing ordinary about that. Third, while unusual circumstances might on occasion lead to a transfer of military vessels overland, no shipowner in his right mind would risk damaging his chief investment, the source of his wealth and income, just to save a little bit of time. Now, if you know a little about the Diolkos, you might be wondering about a couple of specific passages, those in Strabo and Pliny the Elder, which seem to suggest that ships, in general, were moved overland from one sea to another, not just military ships. In fact, if you read these passages carefully, you'll see that both authors were aware of those earlier historical accounts which were famous by the 1st century. Neither Strabo nor Pliny were making contemporary observations about the portaging of ships in their own day, but were referencing the famous portages of ships that they knew about from reading Polybius and Thucydides. This explains Strabo's view of the word Diolkos. By Strabo's day, these accounts were well known. When he came to the region, he identified the narrowest part of the isthmus as that place associated in earlier Greek history with hauling across or portaging. In some, ancient writers indicate that military vessels were on occasion moved over the isthmus given the right conditions, say an ambitious general, hundreds of soldiers or sailors, and the critical need for a stratagem in the opposite gulf. But there's not any evidence at all that Corinthians regularly transferred commercial vessels from sea to sea. You may be wondering about the physical road, discovered during bulldozing operations in the 1950s and excavated by the archaeologist Nikolaos Verdelis. If ship transfers were uncommon, what purpose then did the road serve? The road itself is massive. Constructed of large limestone blocks, Verdelis documented its course for over a kilometer on the Corinthian Gulf side. The road was nearly 6 meters wide at its widest point, and had parallel grooves typically 1.5 meters apart, suggesting the ordinary wear of wheeled wagons. In a few areas, the grooves even appeared to be deliberately cut to keep carts on track. So clearly the form of the road indicates the movement of very heavy cargoes. What kinds of cargoes remains a matter of dispute. Some scholars have suggested the road was used to move commodities like grain, oil, and wine, transported in baskets and amphoras. But there's a problem with this argument in the archaeology itself. Eastern ceramic goods are relatively rare in the Gulf west of Corinth, and Western ceramic goods are rarely common east of the region. As the ceramicist John Hayes once pointed out, the isthmus is more a transition zone between different trading regions. Other scholars have suggested the road was used primarily for the transfer of construction materials like timber, building stone, and marbles. This second explanation seems more probable given the deep ruts in the road and an epigraphic record that records the movement of such construction material between Corinth and Epidaurus in the late classical and early Hellenistic periods. So if the Diolkos Road facilitated the movement of heavy cargoes, we don't need to imagine far-off destinations for the material moved overland. Perhaps the most important destination was Isthmia itself, the site of the Panhellenic sanctuary of Poseidon on the eastern side of the isthmus, where athletes gathered every other year for contests and religious festivals, where Greeks encamped and held common assemblies during war, and where traders created a marketplace to capitalize on the crowds. The Diolkos, read in this light, was the main road to Isthmia, serving the sanctuary by transporting people's goods, construction material, from one side to the other. Seen in this way, the Diolkos can be read in conjunction with the growth of the sacred precinct and activities at Isthmia in the Archaic and Classical Greek periods. As the site became a congregating place for religious, military, and commercial activities, Corinthians strengthened the roads that could bring construction material, food, and people to one of the great Panhellenic sanctuaries of the ancient world. So was the Diolkos really the greatest railway of classical antiquity? Did it really facilitate long-distance trade such that ancient Corinth became a wealthy city in the process? Well, not in the way people have usually imagined it. As always, history is more complex and contested than first meets the eye.